I'm very
Good
happy
morning.
to have you both here. And we will start with the talk of Aliénor Ballangé. Aliénor received her PhD in political theory from Sciences Po, Paris, in 2018 for a dissertation on the democratic theory of European integration, awarded the Prix de Universität de Paris. She was a postdoctoral researcher at Normative Order Center in Goethe University in Frankfurt, and a Deakin Fellow at the University of Oxford in 2023 and 2024. Her research combines European studies, democratic theory, and critical theory to analyze the crisis of representative democracy in European Union. Her work has recently appeared in the Journal of Deliberative Democracy and also in Representation in this year, 2025. In September 25, she joined the Paris Institute of Advanced Studies as the Major Change Chair on Europe and Democracy. The title of her presentation is Deliberation Under Pressure, Reimagining Mini-Publics in Contexts of Democratic Backsliding. So, Aliénor, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to have made this conversation possible transatlantically. And I'm delighted to join you all online today. It would have been nicer to be with you, also with Clementina all together, but it's already great that we have this opportunity. And now, so let me begin with a very simple question. What role can ordinary citizens, such as your neighbor, your favorite fishmonger, or Curitiba's hundreds of taxi drivers play when democracy is in crisis? This question may sound abstract, but in recent years it has become painfully concrete. Around the world, democratic institutions are under strain. The rise of executive aggrandizement, the weakening of intermediary powers, the spread of disinformation, and the erosion of media pluralism have created a hostile environment for public reasoning. And while, as you all know this very well, a mounting number of political leaders in America and Europe invoke the concept of illiberal democracy, citizens are increasingly tempted to inhabit fragmented information spheres rather than a shared public realm. In these circumstances, it may seem as if citizens can do little more than watch democracy erode. Following Sheldon Wallin's audacious idea of inverted totalitarianism, a form of managed democracy that neutralizes citizen participation while preserving the shell of democratic institutions, what can ordinary citizens do but lament the triumph of neoliberal leaders, multinational firms, and the almighty tech industry? Ultimately, many citizens may be tempted to retreat to the soft, smooth space of social media, where opinion rather than discussion dictates the logic of a spectacular democracy. That is, a form of democracy that involves a demobilized, apolitical citizenry rather than a constantly mobilized demos. That is, in sum, a form of democracy which has been emptied of its participatory and deliberative promise. And yet, in this very context, over the past 2 decades, a quiet democratic experiment has been taking place, one that invites citizens to deliberate together rather than merely to vote or protest. I am referring to citizens' assemblies, also called deliberative mini-publics. So, in practice, groups of citizens selected by lot brought together to deliberate on public issue. Participants receive balanced information, hear from experts and stakeholders, and discuss among themselves before formulating recommendations to public authorities. What distinguishes these assemblies from more familiar consultations or opinion polls is their deliberative character, which means that there is an emphasis on reasoning together, on exchanging arguments across differences, and on listening before deciding. Over the last 20 years, these assemblies have multiplied to such an extent that the OECD speaks of a deliberative wave. For example, Ireland used one to debate abortion and same-sex marriage. Iceland used one to draft a constitutional proposal. France, where I come from, convened one on climate policy and another on end-of-life issues. And at the supranational level, the Conference on the Future of Europe brought together, for the very first time in the history of citizen deliberation, hundreds of randomly selected citizens from all 27 member states to deliberate on topics ranging from climate to democracy itself. These examples are often celebrated as democratic success stories. They are said to restore trust, spread a culture of dialogue, and allow citizens to experience equality of voice. But there is a deeper question hiding behind these claims, a question that motivates my own work and research now. If these citizens' assemblies have been designed to improve already stable democracies, such as Ireland or Iceland or Switzerland, for example, what happens when they are deployed in fragile and backsliding democracies or societies? Can instruments designed for democracy's good time survive when democracy itself is under attack? This paradox, deliberation flourishing amid democratic decline, is what I call deliberation under pressure. And to understand this paradox, we need to recall what we mean by democratic regression. In recent years, the concept of democratic backsliding has gained prominence across political science, referring broadly to the incremental erosion of democratic norms and institutions. Key patterns include the degradation of rights and the rule of law, the manipulation of electoral processes, the suppression of media and civil society, and the corrosion of democratic culture. From a deliberative perspective, what I call deliberative backsliding, such forms of backsliding are not merely institutional, but epistemic and communicative. They threaten the very conditions under which public reasoning and democratic self-rule can take place. That is, backsliding disables the principle of non-domination at the core of deliberative democracy, where legitimacy stems from the free and equal participation of citizens in inclusive, reason-guided deliberation. This degradation takes shape through at least four interlinked mechanisms. First, the majoritarian distortion of democratic legitimacy. Second, the normalization of executive exceptionalism over deliberation in the name of crisis governance. Third, the disintermediation of the public sphere through direct polarizing communication. And four, the manipulation of opinion on environments that impair citizens' capacity for independent judgment. These dynamics do not merely weaken institutions, they actively undermine the deliberative infrastructure of democracy. As such, the spread of citizens' assemblies in this context appear strongly paradoxical. How can fora grounded in reason giving an equal voice operate within political systems hostile to their normative foundation? As I said earlier in the introduction, experiments based on citizen-centric deliberation are actually on the rise in backsliding democracy. This increase is particularly striking in Central and Eastern Europe, where democratic backsliding is especially well documented. As you can see on this chart, the first citizens' assemblies in the region were launched in the mid-2010s, by which time Viktor Orban had already been in power for 5 years, and the Polish Law and Justice Party had won both presidential and parliamentary elections. 3 citizens' assemblies were organized in the region in 2020, 8 the following year, and 12 in 2024. The rise of citizens' assemblies in regions experiencing democratic backsliding has actually coincided with a shift in the empirical deliberation literature, which increasingly explores the role of citizen deliberation in democracy's dark time. Scholars have emphasized both the intrinsic democratic merits of citizens' assemblies and their so-called ability to reduce societal division and political disengagement. From this perspective, citizens' assemblies are presented as a promising response to democratic fatigue associated with a broader communication crisis. However, I believe it is another matter to assume that citizens' assemblies can reverse backsliding in context where the preconditions for meaningful citizen deliberation have been systematically undermined. Indeed, how can democratic innovations, such as citizen assemblies, make a difference in environments that are actively hostile to the very norms on which they depend? Raising this question doesn't mean that deliberative democratic innovations can't play a role in regimes undergoing transition or backsliding. However, in order to play a meaningful role in terms of deliberative standards, that is, to be both effective and sustainable against domination, these mechanisms may need to be conceived differently in such hostile contexts. Otherwise, they risk proliferating in what I call a deliberative vacuum, characterized by the following dilemma. If citizens' assemblies publicly challenge the ruling illiberal power, they are likely to be suppressed in a manner similar to critical media and civil society organizations. Conversely, if they seek durability, they must soften their critical and subversive stance, focusing instead on technical issues and problem-solving practices. In the first case, option A, they fulfill the anti-domination raison d'être of deliberative democracy, but they are likely to lack sustainability. In the second case, option B, they are more likely to endure, but they risk being absorbed by the anti-deliberative power that they are intended to resist. So taken together, this dilemma doesn't imply that deliberative innovations should be abandoned, but it suggests instead that we must rethink what these assemblies are for when they operate under pressure, which is a different context than when they operate in a democratic context. If deliberation can't realistically improve or stabilize democracy under conditions of domination, its democratic value must lie elsewhere in the specific function it can perform despite backsliding. In other words, the key question is not whether to multiply CAs, but to what end organize CAs. To answer that, we must shift from asking what assemblies are in design terms to asking what role they are meant to serve. In other words, what functions are they meant to perform within the democratic ecosystem, and how can those functions be calibrated to both survive and make a meaningful impact in conditions of backsliding? In the deliberative democracy literature, citizen assemblies are usually discussed in terms of their form, which is their size, composition, facilitation, and link to potential decision-making. But under conditions of backsliding, these design features are less decisive than the function the assembly is expected to serve. Through comparative work, I have identified 5 main functions of deliberative mini-publics: technical, educational, informational, and militant, and oversight. So now, for the remaining of my time, I will explain each of these functions briefly and talk about each of them with their limits. So as you can see, first, the technical function of citizens' assemblies treats these mechanisms as lay advisory bodies designed to improve policymaking. They are considered as tools for improving governance. It rests on the epistemic claim that ordinary people, when given time, balanced information, and a fair deliberative setting, can reason collectively about complex issues and generate more context-sensitive and socially informed solutions than insulated elites. This rationale underlies a large share of the global deliberative wave. Most assemblies, justified on epistemic grounds, address bounded questions in areas such as environment, urban planning, or transport, or energy. Now, from a normative perspective, this technical function is poorly suited to resisting domination in contexts of democratic backsliding. Because these assemblies address narrow, predefined problems and operate at the local scale, they remain structurally dependent on national actors who may ignore their outputs, and they rarely create space for citizens to identify or contest illegitimate uses of power. They can improve governance, but they do so without confronting the deeper practices of domination that undermine democratic autonomy and equality of voice. Contrary to the technical function, citizens' assemblies with an educational function are justified not by the quality of the policies they generate, but by the civic dispositions they cultivate. The core claim is that participation in structured deliberation teaches citizens to think critically, engage respectfully, tolerate difference, and cooperate as equals, and that these micro-level dispositions can diffuse into the wider public, gradually reinforcing democratic culture. This view treats citizen assemblies as school for democracy, institutions that model and transmit the habits required for democratic life, especially in post-authoritarian or demobilized societies where such habits are fragile or underdeveloped. However, again, this educative ambition may appear normatively and strategically limited. Normatively, teaching people to be fit for democracy risks reproducing the very asymmetries that deliberation is supposed to undo. Emancipation becomes conditional on tutelage. Strategically, in environments of populist backlash, pedagogical interventions are easily rebranded as liberal condescension and cultural engineering, thereby strengthening illiberal narratives rather than weakening them. In this sense, the educational mandate may fail doubly. It can neither guarantee civic emancipation nor inoculate democracy against those who are likely to weaponize the very facts of its educational purpose. An informational function treats citizen assemblies not as problem solvers, but as trusted cognitive intermediaries for the wider public. Rather than deciding, they check and balance arguments, translate complexity, and issue concise, credible guidance for mass electorates. For example, when there are these citizen assemblies before national ballots. And so you have these citizen assemblies giving the pros and the cons of the reasons why to vote or not to vote for at the occasion of a ballot. When designed under conditions of representativeness, neutrality, and rigorous deliberation, informational citizens' assemblies are defended as antidotes to misinformation and as trustworthy public proxies in context of complexity, polarization, and manipulation. But this mandate, this function, faces structural and contextual limits. In backsliding settings, informational citizen assemblies depend on authorities who have no incentive to fund or publicize mechanisms that displace their own narrative, and they have every incentive to co-opt them for legitimating propaganda, which is something that, for example, Viktor Orban did with a national consultation before an election. Even when insulated, the impact of these informational citizen assemblies is constrained by a reception gap. Without independent media ecosystems and the basic interpretive capacities among publics, high-quality outputs may remain unread, unused, or mistrusted. Thus, the appeal of informational CAs as counter-disinformation tools outstrips their feasibility under illiberal conditions. Now, I would like to briefly pause and mention that while the first three functions of citizen assemblies that I have described, so the technical, educational, and informational functions, have been regularly experimented with worldwide over the last 20 years, the remaining two functions that I will now present have been much less theorized and even less tried. The fourth militant function has recently gained the interest of radical civil society organizations, such as Extinction Rebellion in England, most notably, while the fifth oversight function remains purely theoretical and has never been tried. So, coming to the militant function, it reconceives citizen assemblies not as neutral forums of reason-giving, but as instruments of democratic resistance and mobilization under threat. Rather than refining governance, such citizen assemblies would be deployed to rally citizens against autocratization, closer to organized vigilance than to impartial advice. In this approach to citizen assemblies, civil society actors would use sortition to bring diverse publics into contact with a shared imperative, that democracy must be defended. So the objective is clear, there is no deliberation. Democracy must be defended, thereby turning deliberation into the vehicle of collective counterpower rather than of consensus building. This function is context sensitive, so it appears fitter to a context of such as democratic backsliding. But it is also normatively and pragmatically questionable. Militant citizen assemblies risk replacing inclusive deliberation with quasi-partisan recruitment, alienating citizens who rely on procedural safeguards to speak freely. They may also backfire in polarized environments where uncivil counter-mobilization and intimidation are common, exposing ordinary participants to asymmetric risks activists are trained to absorb. Viewed from a non-domination perspective, the question is not only whether militant citizen assemblies can resist a liberal takeover, but whether doing so through confrontation reintroduces exclusion and domination in another key. Finally, the oversight function reconceives or would reconceive citizen assembly not as co-legislative or advisory bodies, but as instruments of scrutiny and constraint. Instead of refining policy or cultivating virtues, oversight CAs would exercise what Pierre Rosanvallon calls negative sovereignty. They would investigate irregularities, expose patronage, and censure abuse when formal checks have failed. This realistic turn aligns CAs with a plebeian tradition of counter-power, closer to a sentinel or a panopticon than to a mini-parliament. And it treats distrust not as a pathology to be cured, but as a democratic resource to be channeled. This mandate is, I contend, better fitted to backsliding context than the technical, educational, or informational designs, all of which presuppose a minimally responsive constitutional environment. An oversight CA doesn't aspire to co-govern. It doesn't require the state's sanction. And it doesn't attempt to normatively improve citizens before letting them act. Its value is defensive, not aspirational. It interposes ordinary citizens between elites and impunity, distributing the work of vigilance when courts, media, and opposition party are co-opted or intimidated. Crucially, oversight citizen assemblies offer a way of resisting domination without reproducing it. Unlike militant CAs, which risk partisan escalation and backlash, oversight bodies operate through documentation, exposure, and public pressure, delegitimating abuse while preserving pluralism. In this sense, they embody a democratically healthier response to crisis. They neither pretend to fix governance through advice, nor attempt to redeem citizens through pedagogy. They institutionalize distrust, and in doing so, give democratic agency its most basic and resilient form, the people's right to say no, to watch, and to shame. Now, and I'm almost done, let me return to where I began, with the question of what citizens can do when democracy is under pressure. The experiments I have described suggest that citizen assemblies are not just technical innovations. They are democratic laboratories in which societies test how much public reasoning can survive amid regression. They show that even when institutions fail, citizens can still practice democracy, maybe less by claiming power than by watching power. In this sense, the value of deliberation under pressure is not purely instrumental, it is existential. It reminds us that democracy is not only the rule of the people, but also the rule under the people's gaze. If representative institutions express the positive face of democracy, the power to decide collectively, deliberative assemblies with an oversight function embody its negative face, the power to resist, to question, to expose domination and corruption. Of course, citizen assemblies alone will not stop autocratization, that's not the point. But they can keep alive the habits of equality, listening, and justification that make self-rule imaginable. They can generate what Arendt once called island of freedoms, small spaces, some would say bubbles, where citizens experience themselves as authors of public reason, even when the broader system discourages it. In democracy's dark times, deliberation under pressure may not save democracy, and will not save democracy, but it can still illuminate the path back to democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aliénor. Now we have the questions and answer part. Joel.
Thank you, Leonor. I have two questions. One is more conceptual and historical. I was just wondering, these mini assemblies, have they some historical grounding in what Tocqueville describes in America about how these assemblies, their work is a kind of just about this history of this concept? And the second one is about what exactly is the relation with these assemblies with the opposition in these countries? For example, in Hungary, the opposition to Orban tries to use these assemblies as a kind of counterweight. They try to mix with them. So, how these assemblies can be used as a forum, also maybe to create new leaders, or for the opposition to build some energy to fight or to engage against the autocratic leaders that are in power? Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I will start with the second question, which is easier. So yes, it's mainly for now. It's been mainly sponsored and organized by the opposition and by militants. So by liberal militants. There are two important guys, one in Poland and one in Hungary, who have basically organized all the local citizens' assemblies, helped by the opposition in major cities, because Budapest is not Hungary, and Varsovia and Cracovia are not Poland. So yes, there is a kind of a use of these mini publics to experience power, also for the opposition, and they are also, and this is important, sponsored or funded by a lot of European institutions, which find a way of re-empowering democracy through these militants and to fight against illiberal leaders. So there is it's really based on local militants and European institutions, supranational level. And but that's weird, Christina, because I can see myself, but I can't see you anymore. So it's a bit weird. I have the feeling of responding to my face.
Okay, we are going to share the audience.
Yeah, I would like to see Joël. Okay, now I can see. I can almost see Joël. And yes, so regarding the first question, that's a difficult one, because the first example of this is Athens. So here you have deliberation and sortition, and you have this, but it's not a mini public in a way, because it's the mini part is much bigger, representing the public than today, because we are talking about cities and people gathering on assemblies to deliberate from this city. So the gap between the mini public and the public is lower. But of course, this is the first model, which is always used in deliberative literature. And then these sortition-based assemblies have disappeared until experimentation in the 20th century and in the late 20th century. But you have, of course, participatory assemblies. You have all of them, and very importantly, during the American and the French revolutions. So this is not a new thing, but in this case, they were organized with people who were voluntary to participate. They were not called by some pollsters to come and deliberate. They wanted to participate. So there is a big difference here.
We have another question. Gabriel.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Gabriel. I'm a PhD student here in Brazil. I don't think you can see me.
No.
Ir para lá.
Great. I can see you.
Here I am. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So I just have two questions that I wanted you to maybe clarify. The first one is if the citizens' assemblies, in your view, can operate online, or if you believe there would be any weakening of any of the functions, any of the 5 functions, if they operate online. Because I do think that now mobilization is directly connected to being online, and how do citizens' assemblies operate on that. And the second one is if we have a conceptual difference between social movements and citizens' assemblies, because it seems to me that many of the functions that citizens' assemblies make are also functions that social movements, such as the feminist movement or as the Black Lives Matter movement, or any of those larger movements also do. So I'm interested in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. There is a huge difference, which is representativeness. So many publics are really supposed to be a mirror, and they use it, a mirror and a filter, which brings some paradox, but it's supposed to be a mirror of the wider public. So it's not supposed to be made of people who are in favor of the feminist movement or in favor or against white supremacism. It's supposed to include these people too. So it's less effective than social movements on the part of participation, that's sure, but it's much higher on the part of representativeness through sortition and the fact that they are supposed to be to have an equate number of women and men, of attitudinal orientations, of urban or countryside people, etc. So that's the big difference, to be short. And regarding the first question, that's an important question, and you're right to ask it. Now, so there is an interesting divide between local and national or supranational, especially supranational assemblies, because now all these supranational assemblies are online, almost all of all, because there has been a scaling of citizen assemblies. So most of them are still local. I mean, 80%, 90% of citizen assemblies are local. But now there are experimentation with global. The first one was the European Assembly, and now there are global assemblies on climate, with the same function of deliberating and based on sortition. So you have people who are sorted and called by lot in Ethiopia and Japan and North America, and they all deliberate together on climate, for example. This is the most well-known, and these are only online. And when I observed the European Assembly, I could observe both sessions in presence and sessions online. For what I saw, it didn't make a huge difference, honestly. It wasn't like people who were online were much more shy or self-conscious, or I mean, there were a lot of technical problems, but that should be solved in the next years. But I would mitigate this by the fact that they met once before being online. The second session was online. So they had the occasion to do this kind of informal, deliberative discussions by themselves without observers, facilitators. So they were together physically. Some became friends or comrades in discussion. And then they were sent online, and they did the second weekend online. So I don't know if that's a bit different from having the whole citizen assembly online.
Well, I also have a question. Um, I'm thinking about Condorcet, when Condorcet, in the plan of constitution for the for France in the 18th century, was thinking about primary assemblies, and it seems very similar with these mini publics and citizens assemblies. And I'm thinking about two functions that you mentioned: the technical function and also the informational function, and it raises a question for me: how these representative samples are chosen. They are elected, or they are indicated, or they are, I don't know how we can select these representative samples.
So
And
it's all by lot. So it's purely it's by happenstance. They are not elected. They are not chosen. They are just called. So I don't know. You could be called as a woman or as a person from more than, let's say, 30 years old, or from the white community. Or so the idea is to have a stratification. So the people who organize these events decide that the sortition will be made on 4 to 6 criteria. So the usual criteria are sex, and not gender, but sex, age, geographical origin, education, and yes, where you sometimes there are age, of course, and there are sometimes attitudinal criteria. So you are asked a certain number of questions, and from your response, the people, the sponsors will think you are more left or more right, or more pro Europe or against Europe, and then they will put you in the category and say, okay, we need 0.5% of pros Europe and 50% against European integration. And so we need these people, and we will make sure that the final assembly is representative of the public. If it's said that the public is, let's say, half for Europe and half against Europe. So it's really based on general polls about the society, and then it's supposed to be mirrored, strictly mirrored, to be representative of this public in these assemblies.
all right. Clementina?
Thank you very much, Ali. I have a quick question, I think. I was very intrigued by the 5 functions you identified. And I'm not sure I understood correctly, but it seemed to me you were presenting them as, at least to some extent, mutually exclusive, or at least it seemed like the last 2 exclude the first 3 and vice versa. And I wasn't convinced about that. If I understood correctly, then I wasn't very convinced about that. I was wondering why, for example, the educational function cannot always as well accompany the others, and whether it's rather
absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that. I should have said it, but it's really like for analytical clarity. But but of course, in the paper, I also say that in practice, in real world experiments, they overlap, and maybe it's even good that they overlap. So it's not only that in fact they do, but normatively they should. But I totally, it's really just an ideal typical definition of the functions. Yeah.
And just as a follow-up, or not, or maybe as a follow-up from something that was already asked and you've been pushed on, and in general, all deliberative democracy suffers from this, which I see as a weakness, or at least, a point to be clarified. When you talk about militant function, how different is that from what could be, for example, a partisan function? So what is the place? That's more or less what the question of representativeness that Christina was asking before was being asked to leads. So if you can conceive of a militant function of a deliberative public, of a deliberative assembly, how close is that to conceiving of a partisan function as well? When democracy is what we assist today on the debate of whether democracy is at risk or not. And that might be still a debate that is legitimate within a working democracy. So when the militant defense of democracy is in fact a partisan defense of one idea of democracy, and why that partisan function would be excluded, if so, from the functions of deliberative.
For me, the militant function and the partisan function are more or less the same.
Okay.
So it's just that militant, because it's mostly organized by civil society organization, and partisan would be that they would be organized by political parties, which has never been done to my knowledge. There has never been like a socialist party in Bulgaria, or I don't know, organizing many publics. But that would come in the broader category of the militant function, because then democracy is the object you are fighting for. So it's not the design or the procedure that you use to stand for an idea, but it is the very object you are defending through this potential mini publics. But again, it has never existed. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Aliénor. Now we are going to have the talk of Clementina Fusillo. Clementina has recently concluded a Justitia Center for Advanced Studies Research Fellowship at Goethe Universität in Frankfurt, where she worked on democratic representation. She has previously lectured in politics, philosophy, and economics at the University of Sheffield. And she has been a doctoral and postdoctoral researcher at the University of Warwick. As of November 2005, she will be a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at Goldsmiths University, working on the political theory of Aldo Moro. Her talk is entitled Power and the Representative, Towards a Systemic View of Democratic Representation. Thank you very much, Clementina, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and of course, special thanks to Christina and whoever has been helping her organizing this event for inviting me. It's an honor and a great pleasure. So I'm really grateful. So as the title of the presentation hopes to suggest, what I'll do today is trying to outline a systemic view of representation, moving from questioning existing, although often implicit, assumptions about the democratic representative and the power they wield. I have to do a quick disclaimer. This is very much work in progress. I've already presented it twice before, and it has slightly evolved, but I'm still not sure what the destiny about this is going to be, whether it's a journal article or possibly whether it will be developed into a book project. But certainly it did start as a single-authored piece, but it's over time become a collaborative project. So I want to credit Dr. Leo Steeds for developing this with me. I'll give just a quick overview of what I'm going to discuss. So first I'll say a few words on the theoretical context underpinning what's increasingly acknowledged as a systemic turn in the literature, which is obviously where any attempt to provide a systemic view of representation ought to belong. Secondly, I'll suggest an epistemic shift, which I believe casts light on aspects of representation that existing accounts have failed so far to capture. And I introduce what I've been calling the representative standpoint. Third, I'll discuss what I see as two important faults in the current debate. I call them two common senses that limit the scope of current systematic approaches to representation. And these are faults that the representative standpoint both reveals and helps to confront. And I'll finally move to what I'm calling, with this horrible long name, a representative-centered systemic view of representation. The two elements of which I see it being made, the minimal conceptual structure and the historical emergent infrastructures of representation. Let me add that I was planning to say something as a way of concluding, but I was also counting on an extra hour, having miscalculated the time difference, which I eventually didn't have. So apologies if the end of the presentation will be a bit improvised. So as for the context, Aliénor has already talked about it. If I understand correctly, the title of the conference, we are all certainly very aware of the fact that for nearly 3 decades now, scholars as well as observers outside the academia have consistently talked of an ever-deepening crisis of representation and of democratic representation, of democracy and that of democratic representation in particular. And the symptoms are under everybody's eyes, from voting absenteeism to lower and lower rates of approval for politicians, declining trust and respect for institutions, rise nearly everywhere of populist and authoritarian movements, and unfortunately also governments, through to wars, which I see as the ultimate failure of representative democratic politics. The immediate causes of this crisis are also in many ways obvious, from rising in economic inequalities, the feeling that democracy have been replaced, as Aliénor mentioned, by rule of experts, bureaucrats and judges, lack of correlation between majority preferences and policy outcomes. So in response to these ever clearer manifestation of a crisis, the literature on representation has seen a flare of critical interventions, which question the descriptive and normative purchase of traditional theoretical accounts, and opened up the problem of how to conceptualize and evaluate representation in the face of the growing inadequacy of its classical forms and justificatory narratives. This has in turn led to two theoretical developments, which are by now very well known in the field. The first of which that has become known as the democratic rediscovery of representation, emphasized the centrality and distinctiveness of representation, not just as a second best solution to direct democracy, but rather as itself an essential democratic practice. And the second, the so-called constructivist turn, which challenged the assumptions that representation merely reproduces a pre-existing reality, putting forward instead a more generative and dynamic understanding of representation as complicit in the making of the reality itself it represents. So a co-constitutive practice that performs political reality into being. Now, the new understanding emerging as the combined effect of these innovations achieved what I have called elsewhere the spatial, temporal, and agential liberation of the way we think of representation. So space-wise, it extended concerns from an exclusive focus on the notion of territory to new interest in less rigid territorial, rigid spatial notions such as situation and context. Similarly, time-wise, the new understanding of democratic representation added to past-oriented concern for what in the classic debate called the making present again of the promissory traditional model of representation. Also added to this also an interest into the future as a legitimate referent of representation. So the making present anew of what has been called by Mansbridge anticipatory forms of representation. And finally, agency-wise, the focus of contemporary theories is no longer rigorously restricted to institutional agents, but it also now includes informal representatives that operate beyond the parameters of electoral institutions. It is as a direct consequence of these enlarged focuses that the past decade has seen increasingly explicit attempts to reconceive of representation beyond the dyadic and static terms that the classic account entails, in order to account for the systemic and dynamic character of representative practices, which has in turn led to growing calls to take what Jenny Mansbridge has called recently a full representative system approach. So this is, to be clear, the picture to which I hope to add some definition. And these are the kind of calls I would like to try and answer. Now, as much as, sorry, I've forgotten to move the slides. That's why. That's because I can't see my presenter view, so I've opened two slides. I'm very sorry. So we are here now. Oh, I can't see exactly what's on. You should be seeing a slide called context, right? Yeah. Okay, so as much as the theoretical innovations I just outlined have transformed the way we think of democratic representation, what I've argued in the past is that these have nonetheless left untouched the implicit epistemological premises that the traditional accounts that were typical of the traditional accounts. And that's where I want to intervene. Okay, so you should be seeing the right slide. Okay, so most democratic theory indeed operates more or less explicitly from what the constructivist vocabulary has called the citizen standpoint. Now the phrase is Michael Soward's, and he uses it to say that making normative assessments about democratic representation require taking up the standpoint of the citizen. So the theorist, that's the point, is in no epistemically superior position to make this judgment. It's the citizen who is ultimately entitled to tell good from bad representation. My argument, however, has been that not only there is an unacknowledged tension at the core of the citizen standpoint between the standpoint of the citizen who is represented by others and the standpoint of the citizen who is instead engaged in the representation of others, but also that there is an unrecognized conflation of the citizen standpoint with the former. So that is that the contemporary theories of representation are almost exclusively delivered from the standpoint of the representative. Instead, and this is the first way in which I intervene into this debate, I try to answer the call of the systemic turn in the literature by sketching what I claim is a rarely seen picture, the picture of the representative system as it appears from the perspective of the representative themselves. That is from what I've called the representative standpoint. Now, one of the first things that jumps to the eye once we look at representation from the representative standpoint is that an important obstacle to embracing the calls for a full systemic turn comes from the debate itself, and more precisely from what I have identified as two common senses that need to be confronted. The first is the common sense about the primacy of the relationship between the representative and the represented. Indeed, whilst since the innovations I've mentioned, most scholars have notionally abandoned the dyadism, the strict dyadism of classic accounts by emphasizing democratic representation as in fact a complex system of multiple and overlapping relationships. In practice, despite loosening the givenness of the bond between the representative and the represented, existing accounts have continued to reaffirm implicitly, but also sometimes explicitly, the fundamental centrality of a single dyadic relationship, that between the representative and the represented. This, in fact, indeed remains the central feature descriptively, and the only normatively relevant relation in current understanding of representation. And following from the first, the second common sense that needs to be confronted is the common sense about the representative being at all times and in all contexts a wielder of power. This, I suggest, is the often unexamined premise of current descriptive and normative accounts of representation, informing the view that the representative should be the default object of suspicion of critical efforts. So, sorry if I'm slow in passing it. I'm using two screens here. So how does the representative standpoint challenge these common senses? So it challenges the first, so the primacy of the relationship between the representative and the represented, by making visible what I suggest must be regarded as two more equally fundamental relations that any representative necessarily engages in the process of representing others. And these are the relationship of the representative to the representatives of others, so other representatives, and the relationship of the representative to themselves. It is only when we take these two as seriously as we take the first one, the relationship of the representative with the represented, that I think we can make sense of something that the literature has identified, but hasn't yet explained, and that's the recursiveness, as Mansbridge just called it, of representation. It's involving the continuous moving back and forth between, she talks, quoting in turn Williams, she talks about consultations with constituents and deliberations with other legislators. I'll move to a different language, but that's what I think is the link between what I suggest and what's already been identified. So basically, what the perspective of the representative makes legible is that the relational element that most democratic theory places at the core of political representation and treats as its minimal conceptual structure binds more than only the entity that represents and the entity that is represented. Here I'm quoting Castiglione and Warren. In fact, I claim it simultaneously also binds the representative to the representative of others and the representative to themselves. As a consequence of challenging the first, the way I have just described, the representative standpoint also challenges the second of our common senses. And this is clear, especially if we understand power in Rainer Forst's terms as the capacity to motivate others to think or act in ways they would not otherwise think or act. When power is defined this way, I think it becomes obvious that by placing the representative at the center of a plurality of relations within which they are at different times and to varying degrees always both givers and takers of reasons, that is motivation to think or act in ways one would not otherwise think or act, the representative standpoints also necessarily defeats the view of the representative as simply powerful, making in turn of the challenge of understanding power in democratic representation the challenge of, first and foremost, making visible and identify the various spaces of justification, to keep with Forst's vocabulary, within which the representatives are wielders of powers, of course, but also at different times and to varying degrees, in important ways, subject to the power of others. So what are these spaces? How many of them there are? How they all of the same kind? These are the sort of questions I've had in mind since I've started looking at representation as a system, and this is what I've come up with so far. No, sorry. So in the overview, I had a simplified version of the title. Here I have another simplified version of the title of what I'm putting together. If I had to give you the full length, it would be quite ugly and long, and it would be the representative-centered, six-fold recursive system of representation. I'll try to come up with something nicer. And also I'll try to stop adding elements to it. There's a question mark in brackets there, because this used to be a threefold, then became a fourfold, a fivefold, and it's now sixfold. So I'm afraid it will keep expanding if I don't decide to put an end to it. So I have so far identified two sets of relationships. The first includes three relationships that constitute what I'm calling the minimal conceptual structure of democratic representation. It is to say, what I think must be present for us to say that an instance of democratic representation is taking place. And these are the relationships of the representative to the represented, to the representative of others, and to themselves. These are the relationships that the representative standpoint, as I try to summarize, allows us to identify. Without the representative engaging in these three relationships, I would say we are not witnessing democratic representation. In addition to this set, however, I suggest that there are three further relationships crucial to the practice of democratic representation today, but that are nonetheless contingent. They could have been otherwise, in the sense that they are the historical product of technological and social developments in modern democracy. And these are the relationship of the representative to the state bureaucracy, and this is the last I've added. I'm absolutely not happy yet with how I'm calling it, and honestly, I'm not even sure exactly what I mean. I'll have visual support later to try to share what I have in mind. So the state bureaucracy to the party, their party or movement or group. So I would say to any any part of the political reality to which the representative belongs, and to the media. let me add that I'm currently still struggling a bit with shifting from the language of relationships to the language of spaces. So I've called these spaces of justification. It's clear that to each relationship there is a corresponding space, but you'll see me going back and forth a bit abruptly. Apologies for that. So I'll say something more about the minimal conceptual structure. And here again, this is a bit of the newer part, so I'm not 100% sure. But one thing I think I've understood is that the three elements constituting the minimal conceptual structure, so the relationship to the represented, to the representative of others, and to themselves, actually correspond to what I take to be the three essential functions of democratic representation, which are a partisan, three functions that ought to coexist and ought to be fulfilled for an instance of representation to be taking place. And these are the partisan, the unifying, and the reflective, what I'm calling now the reflective transformative function. So the first corresponding to what the representative does in engaging with the relationship to their representative, their constituents, to the represented. The second, the unifying function corresponding to the activities of the representative in the square. And finally, the reflective transformative function, which pertains to the relationship of the representative to themselves. And here, again, I switched from relationship to spaces, and I suggest that these three are the spaces corresponding to this relationship. The square, that's again where the representative meets the people they represent. The circle, which can be any diplomatic conference like Yalta here in the picture, any parliamentary, any municipal council, but also the table around which unions representatives and the representatives of the university sit together. So this is a kind of space that would escape if we were not using the perspective of the representative. And the self. This is again something I haven't yet developed, but what I mean to highlight here is that every time a representative engages in the practice of representing others, there's always, in this going back and forth between the square and the circle, a moment in which they are alone with themselves, that is, in which they engage their mental, spiritual, moral faculties to elaborate the reasons that they have exchanged in one space and that they are bringing to the other, and vice versa. And then there is the historically emergent infrastructure. So the second set of relationships. Sorry, I must have lost track of the time. I'll be quick. Here again, I was saying these are here. I added to the first three this relationship that are emerged from as an increasingly complex and contingent result of a long historical process. Here I'm building on Bernard Manin, the principles of representative government, which is who famously provided one of the most influential accounts of this history. And I'm combining it with more recent, with Jan Werner Müller's more recent work on the critical infrastructure of democracy. Both Manin and Müller, one with a historical contribution, the other with a conceptual normative, talk of the party and the media as this historically emergent and or critical infrastructure. I originally too was focusing only on those, but as I said, more recently, I thought I had to add somehow the state as part of this. Sorry, did I forget again to show you the? Yeah, I forgot again to show you the slide. Sorry, this is the square, this is the circle, and this is the self. And this is state bureaucracy. Here I'm using this photographic work by Jan Banning. I like the fact that he went around the world and took pictures of state bureaucrats, and I think we all can recognize ourselves in those, recognize some of our experience. Most probably we have an experience from the standpoint of the citizen, but the representative too experiences state bureaucracy as a space of justification, where the justification you are receiving in many cases are the justification of the law, of the regulation, and often the inflexibility that the experience of frustration that the inflexibility of those justification can produce in the representative. Then, so yes, the state bureaucracy, then the party. Again, excuse the nostalgic feel here. This is the Italian Communist Party, sometime the Congress of the Communist Party, sometime in the late 60s or early 70s, and that's another space of justification, in which the representative finds himself conflicted when it comes to combine the legitimate justification coming from within this space with as equally legitimate justification coming from other spaces. And finally, the media. Here again, this is a vintage image, probably more and more rarely seen these days, especially in Italy. Our government hasn't given a press conference for a long time. Actually, they gave one 2 days ago after months and months, but it only lasted 10 minutes because they suspended it. But although evolved technologically and in many other ways, the media, the relationship with the media is a fundamental relationship in which the representatives find themselves, and again one in which power is in which they can both be wielding power and being subject to the power of the media. So I'll just, again, as I said, I wanted to say more in the way of concluding, but I didn't. I found myself with the less time than I hoped to have. So I'll just say that I think this is obviously, there is still obviously a lot to develop in this framework, but I trust that this could be useful to interpret current practices of democratic representation. I have in mind very practical things that we see happening every day, again with when it comes to the relationship with them. We are used to judge the representatives for their relationship with us, the representative, but we do it less when it comes to judge them for the way they behave in their party, or for the way they behave in parliament, for the way they treat their peers, so to speak, like other people representing others. Those are things I think are all normatively significant spaces where we should look at the behavior of our representatives and consider those normative, those obligations, the obligations emerging from those spaces when we judge them in their behavior in the space they share with us, which I've called the square, the space where they engage in the relationship with us constituents. A second thing I came to my mind, I wanted to mention. I think it's an important potential benefit this approach could yield is helping disentangle the power of the representative from a kind of structure of power with which they tend to be symbolically associated, which is the same logic that taken to its extreme informs anti-establishment elements, for example, of populist ideology. So it's something that I think has a potential usefulness. And the last thing I could say is that obviously that the road is very long here to make sense of this framework, because I've used Forst's notion of power, which is a normatively neutral notion. So from here to the point of being able to say this way of exerting power is democratically legitimate, this is not. And this way of combining the being subject to and the being a wielder of power in this space and this other space is legitimate or not, that's a whole other thing that I haven't even started thinking about. Thank you very much, and I'll leave it to the Q&A. I can't hear.
Thank you very much, Clementina. Now we have the questions and answers part. Thales, Joel, Karine, Gabriel. Oh, we have a lot of questions. So, Thales.
Yes, thank you, Clementina, for your talk. This is Thales, PhD student. Can we go back to Clementina's slide, please? I think it's about the sixfold. Is it possible? Yes, because I have a question about that. Which is, I cannot see the slide, so
I've put back to the sixth.
Yes. So the question is, oh yes, thank you. The question is if you think that your number 5 category, the media, includes also everyone, so the whole represented people, because in the number 1 and 2, it seems that this distinction that you made includes, though number 1, it seems that includes those who I represent, and number 2, the representatives of others. So it seems that I don't have a category here to everyone. So I mean, you don't have a category here to all the people that are represented, or the whole represented. So you think that this is on your category number 5, the media, or in another category or something like that? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Thales. You actually strike straight at my heart, because I knew there was a problem there. And when I told you, see, I shifted from 2 to 3 to 3, from 3 to 4. Originally, I hadn't distinguished between the minimal conceptual structure and the infrastructure, and I put the audience, I called it the audience instead of the media, and it was a way of confronting the problem you are talking about. Now, the way I understand this is this: the way one representative communicates to other people that they do not represent is through the representative of others. So the reason for being of a parliament is precisely to combine this picture, this puzzle of a political reality, and put it together. However, the square itself alone, and this has been picked up recently, and there is literature developing on that, on who's in the square. If you think of the square of the picture of Churchill, we are only assuming that Churchill is talking to people he represents or that feel represented by him. But there might be in that square, or at least in my town, there are elections and there are speeches. I always go to hear the speeches of the people I'm not going to vote for. So I'm in that square, but I'm part of the audience. It's true that so I'm still struggling with understanding where exactly this general public belongs into this system. Certainly, the media could, I mean, theoretically could be how can I say, could be where the general public belongs, but they are the media. So precisely because they are in the middle, they cannot, I mean, that relationship cannot be the relationship of the represented to the general public, because it's mediated by the media precisely. So when I look at that, I have to focus on how so for example, a kind of problem that can be grasped through this framework, if we look at the media, is how do we judge representative who do selfies and record themselves speaking to their phone and use that to talk to people? How healthy is that for democracy? That's the kind of problem the relationship to the media wants to capture. The problem you raise, I haven't found a proper place for it yet, but it's a very important one. Thank you for finding that out so quickly.
Thank you, Clementina. I was just wondering, how is the relation with this what you are calling a systematical approach with the constructivist approach that you mentioned at the beginning? So how is this, or maybe it's not, but there is a kind of constructivist relation of how you are building this and how these levels relate with each other? So this is my question. Thank you.
I cannot give you a conceptual answer because, as you know, for the conversations we have had, I'm very confused about constructivism. The way constructivism is used in the literature, I can give you an answer concerning how the literature works and what's the link between what's being called the constructivist turn and this more recent systemic turn. What the constructivist turn does is fundamentally saying we cannot think of representation as something that leaves a pre-existing element, part of the political reality, exactly as it is. You know, it's a representative finds a constituency and goes there to represent them. No, representation is constructivist in the sense that the represented does not pre-exist representation. Representation makes it. So the moment I say I represent you, I'm intervening in the making of what you are, and we are co-making each other, the represented and the represented. In doing so, the constructivist turn explodes what is the idea of what is a representative. It's not only an elected MP, it's not only but it's, for example, Greta Thunberg, it's Bono saying that I represent the poor in Africa. All those people, the famous element of the toolkit, of the constructivist toolkit, is the representative claim. Whenever there is a claim to represent others, we are most probably witnessing an instance of representation. Because of that, because of this expansion that the constructivist turn produces, we are suddenly in a much more complex situation than the simple pre-existing represented and representative two elements of the original model considered. So we switch from a dyadic model, the represented and the principal agent model, promissory represented, to a systemic model in which there are many more than two elements. So that's why it's been called a system. But then there's very little has been done yet to understand it as a system. So to see exactly what are these elements, what are their functions, what are their relationships, what are the structures. So this is it's happening. I mean, I think there's more literature on democratic, on democracy as a system than on representation specifically. But that's an ongoing conversation right now. Sorry, I'm not sure I answered the.
Hi, my name is Karine Salgado. I'm a professor at Federal University of Minas Gerais. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Clementina, for your talk, very inspiring. And you talked about the historically emergent infrastructure of democratic representation. And parties are an element pointed in this topic. And my question is, despite the fact that they were supposed to be part of the solution, it seems to me at least that they became part of the problem. So how do you see the party's role in the future of the system of representation? Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. Unfortunately, I have no idea yet. I only know so far that they exist and that they are still there, and that there needs to be that representatives cannot but have a relationship with the party. So I'm still at the point of having to acknowledge that yet. And because they exist, that we must find a good way of having that relationship. That's why I distinguish between the historically emergent and the necessary, like, minimal conceptual structure, because I think democratic representation can exist without party. It has. Conceptually it works. We can come up with a fictional genealogy of democratic representation, and we can imagine it having worked properly in somewhere at some point in history. Yet today we have the parties, and they are just as real. They are not necessary, but they are there. So I don't think it's necessary that without parties representation would fail to be democratic. But given how things are now, I don't think we can do without finding a way to deal with them. Sorry, I haven't understood yet how I would properly answer your question.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I just have a question in regards with your using of the concept of power. This is Gabriel who is talking here. So I wonder if you think there is a necessity to consider a strategic form of power, in the sense that it seems to me that the representative has a different kind of power when compared to the general public or the media, and that in that sense that they have the power to create binding norms, and that this power is also disputed within the political system. Here this conception is close to what Habermas has called administrative power. So this power to create binding norms in a specific political system. Do you believe that there is any room for that in your conception of a systemic view of representation? Because it's not an equal relationship between the media or the general public sphere or the citizens and the representative, because the representative, even though these other elements of civil society have the ability to motivate or to exert power for the representative, they also have the representative also have a different kind of power when compared to the general public. So I was wondering how you can see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. That's, and again, a super difficult question, because, well, power is clearly a hugely contested notion, and I understand it very little. That's why I've chosen a very in a way basic, but I'm not saying it to detract from it. In fact, it adds to the value of that formulation of power of Rainer Forst, that's the important part for me. It's normatively neutral. It's just a descriptive account of power. It's only saying power is the capacity to motivate others to do things or to act or think in a way they would not otherwise. So when I imagine of that thing that we're calling power going on between a representative and their constituents, I imagine the representative telling the constituents, or let's start with the constituents telling the representative, you have to make this thing happen for us because it's very important, etc. And otherwise, we will not re-elect you the next time. That's a form of power. That some motivation is being given. Is it good enough to make me act in a certain way? That also depends on a lot of other things, but that's already power going on. Then the representative goes to the circle and says, look, we have to make this thing happen. And then another representative brings another reason and gives the representative a motivation to go back to their constituents and say, look, there are people poorer than us just in the other constituency. That's a reason. That's power. That's the power of reasons. Now, your question on whether there is space to account for strategic power and all the forms that power can take, there must be. Otherwise, it doesn't. I mean, this is absolutely useless. But I'm very far yet from. One thing I can say is, and that comes to my mind because recently I've given a version of this paper, which was, however, more on absence, presence, and visibility, and there are certain spaces that are less visible than others. Like I was thinking of diplomacy and how much it is important that diplomacy takes place. Not on TV, not in the Oval Room, not like Donald Trump has showed us, that it's important that it's secret because certain forms of power need to be exerted because probably strategic power. So there must be the place to account for that, but I haven't found it yet.
Hello, Dr. Fusillo. My name is Alessandro. I'm an undergraduate student here at university. I'd like to know, in your view, what's the best way to diminish the gap between the represented and the representative, especially in a country like Brazil, that distance seems so marked and so perceived by the largest part of the electorate. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting question again, because it allows me to open up an area of what a part of this piece of theory that I haven't mentioned. Well, I have a very straightforward answer to that. I think more representatives. In Italy, recently, they have cut the number of MPs. I mean, I find it absurd. Why? I don't understand why. They say it's expensive, but it's so much more expensive to deal with a democratic society that doesn't feel represented. And the number of people who represent others could make a big difference. It would fill that gap. It would fill it with, if you see it vertically, like more layers, but also just horizontally, more people representing, and that's important also because I think in the experience of representing others is a transformative experience. I mentioned the transformative function of representation, but I understand it much more literally than the literature seems to do. I think when you when you go through the experience of representing others, you change in a way that is valuable from the standpoint of democracy. So the more we have people who make that experience, the more we have people who are, when they are represented, can multiply the effort of, obviously here I have in mind a good representative. I know there are bad representatives, but I'm imagining the possibility of good ones. I'm in this moment doing a bit of ideal theory, but the more we have of those, the more that educative function that Aliénor was mentioning was in respect to the experience of deliberation. I think it's worth also, and I dare saying, sorry Ali, more, even more when it comes to the experience of representing others. And I would like to add something. There is much more representation already taking place in our societies than we acknowledge. So certainly we would need more formal representatives, but it would already be something if we could acknowledge, valorize the representation already taking place. There are a lot of informal representatives. There are a lot of people who make that effort, who interpret their role as citizens as a representative role. So they have a little square, they have a little circle, and they move back and forth from those. They reflect on what's on the reason given there, and they invent other reasons so that they can be given in the other space to make people act in. And they exert their civic power in the form of representation. I think these things would fill the gap. Then Brazil is huge if you're talking about physical distances. I don't know. There isn't much that can be done to fill those gaps apart from flying, I'm afraid.
So I would like to raise one question for you both before we finish this panel, because my question is, I will try to connect your talk with the debates we had here in this conference during this week, and it's about the concept of crisis. You both started your talk using this concept or this idea, and Aliénor afterwards changed it to regression. And we discussed a lot if we facing the problems and the challenge of democracy nowadays, it's right to use the concept of crisis or regression. And I was thinking about this because it's very common to use the concept of crisis if you think about Carl Schmitt, the crisis of parliamentary democracy. And it seems to me that it's a very severe concept, because if you thinking the medical concept that if the patient has a crisis, she will die or she will heal. And it's not like that with democracy. It seems to me that we always will face problems. And it's part of our responsibility to think about how to deal with these problems. And so I'd like to hear you both about this use of the idea or the concept of the crisis of democracy.
I can go first if you want, Clementina. And I had a question for you, but I will ask you privately then about the imperative or the free mandate, which means that maybe your represented are also the whole people in itself, because you're supposed to represent the whole constituency and not only the people who voted for you. So that was about a bit more about this idea of the representatives of others, and I was like, but who are the others in democracy? Because the others are also yours, supposedly. But to respond to Clementina, to Christina, yeah, I very much agree with you, Christina, and also in a very old paper, I wrote about democracy as a regime not in crisis but of crisis. So I very much agree. For me, democracy means crisis. There is a kind of connection between these two, and also it's interesting that since the very beginning of democracy, there is this anacyclosis, this cyclical version of political regimes, where democracy used to be the crisis of oligarchy, and now oligarchy is the crisis of democracy. So, I mean, this notion of what comes worse after what is already worse of something else is very interesting, and it should be thought much more, because yes, for Plato, democracy was the degraded version of oligarchy, which was the degraded version of aristocracy, because of course, if you have only oligoi, so that means a few number of people ruling, for him it was better because it was closer to the philosopher king model. So democracy was already something closer to the populace regime. And now we think that the ruling of the demos in itself is a good thing, and when it comes to fewer people, then it's a degradation. So that's a crisis, and it's a very interesting thing. And the founding fathers of the American Foundation, famously, one of them in the Federalist Letters, famously said that democracy couldn't but commit suicide and self-murder. So it was like being in democracy meant being able to die and to kill oneself. That's a very interesting point. Clementina.
Can I answer Aliénor's question or not?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I love this question. And that's because it is one of the, I mean, probably it's the first problem that I wanted to try and deal with when I started thinking of representation. I understand it this way. We both, as a representative, we both represent a part and the whole. But because representation is a process, it's a going back and forth. When we go from the square to the circle, we arrive in the circle and we represent a part. When we come back from the circle to the square, we represent the whole, because we've just been there. We, from the constructivist point of view, we could say we construct an image as provisional as it needs to be in a democracy, because it's the keeping of this an ongoing process that makes it a democracy. We have a provisional image of the whole, of everybody. We go back to the square, and there we represent everybody. And then we reconstruct an updated version of the image of the constituents, and we bring the image of this part back to where it needs to be put together with the whole. That's how I see the need to combine the part and the whole. And then going to the question of honestly, I agree with you that certainly there is an abuse of the word crisis. 30 years of talking about that every day, everywhere, it risks to stop meaning anything. I agree also that democracy is to some extent the capacity to deal with this crisis, the crisis of how we how do we manage to get together, to be in peace with each other? How do we coordinate this plurality. It's a critical thing to do. It's critical in itself. But maybe I would also add that I don't think that it's democracy that is in crisis. If democracy is in crisis, it's in crisis as a consequence of the fact that humanity is in crisis. So unless and in fact, we need democracy to fix the crisis of humanity. I don't know. I don't know which comes first and how do we do that. But I don't think the problem is that the true problem is that democracy is in crisis. We are in crisis as a species, and I don't know how old we are as a species. Maybe we are 16. I don't know. Maybe we are going through that phase, and hopefully we'll fix that soon.
So, guys, thank you very much. I wish you could be here to have a lunch together with us now, because it's lunchtime in Brazil. And it was a great pleasure to have you. And I hope soon we manage to organize to have you both here in presence. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. We look forward to that.
Bye-bye.
And enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.